Hey, Alan, how you doing? Can't complain. Yeah, I'm ready. We got someone else in here. Who else is in here? And like I just said in the general channel, there's room for the first 12 to join me in real time, such as it is, by jumping into the appear.in link that I dropped in there. So if you'd rather ask me your questions rather than type them, or not have to deal with the delay between what I have on my screen and what you're seeing on yours, that's an option. Hey there, Holland. How you doing? Cool. Oh, is that you, Zach? Oh, sorry. Okay, that makes so much more sense now. Holy crap. All right, well, we got 3 more people in the room. Who else is out there? Yeah, it can be pretty rough. So that's why I'm trying this route with appear.in. So up to 12 people can join me. You're the only one in here. So such is my lot in life. Yeah. All right, well, to the other 3 of you, fantastic. Thanks for literally nothing. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is all about content for weeks 11 through 14, really. So we're going to be talking about jQuery. We're going to be talking about some higher order functions, how to think and program a little more functionally, which is going to help you build larger scale apps and manage and maintain larger scale apps. Yeah, so let's just jump right in and see where we go from there. Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me go ahead and share that. There we go. How about now? Cool. All right. So jQuery is an awesome tool. It's a lot like Bootstrap for JavaScript, if you will. It's a whole library of pre-written code that allows us to do a whole lot with a lot less. And for all of you guys out there who are just jumping into jQuery or haven't yet and are exploring something new, let me just give you a quick example of how jQuery can work, and then I'll come back and talk about what it actually is. So jQuery syntax is pretty simple. We start with the $, which 100% of the time indicates jQuery, followed by parentheses, and then something like document. And this is going to be the target of a jQuery function or a jQuery event. $, followed by our target. And then we have a method on that target, such as .ready. And what this statement is essentially saying is when the document is ready, we do stuff. So inside this ready function, we actually insert an anonymous function, which is what's going to do stuff when our document is ready. This is the entirety of jQuery syntax. There is nothing more complicated than this in jQuery. The only thing that can get complicated is these lines can grow. We can use dot notation to stack functions on top of one another. But at its core, this is it. This is it. So, another quick example. If I had a button, I'll give it an ID of my BTN in my HTML. And I wanted this button to say, well, let's just have it pop up an alert for now. Then to do that with jQuery, it would be very easy. First, what I'd always recommend is write your pseudocode. So what is it that you want to accomplish? Well, when I click the button, I want to see an alert that says hello. Something very, very simple. So, first question. First thing you should do is actually break your pseudocode up into different clauses. So I've got when I click the button as clause 1, and then I want to see an alert that says hello as clause 2. So you break up the sentence that way. And each of these clauses is going to represent a line of jQuery like document.ready. So, following the same pattern, the target for when I click the button is going to be the button. $, parentheses. And inside those parentheses, we're going to use regular old CSS selector syntax in order to target that button. So hashtag myBTN. And this is jQuery's method of selecting and targeting my button. I can now manipulate this however I'd like. If I wanted to, I could store it in a variable just like that. And I no longer need to write something like document.getElementById by ID or query selector or getElements by class name or anything like that. This $, parentheses, my button selects the element with the ID of my button and stores it for me in JavaScript. So that's our target. And the event is going to be click. So when I click my button, I want to see an alert that says hello. So I'm just going to put alert hello in here. Save. Reload. Now when I click this button, oh, we don't see the alert. Do do a console log instead. Make sure it's firing. Nope. Hold on 1 second. Oh, my main.js isn't even hooked up. Ha. All right. Sorry, guys. js/main.js, close script, save, reload, click the button, and there's our console log. Now let's change it back to alert. And there's our alert. All right, so $ target, event or action, do stuff. That's really it. It's easy to get confused when you have a lot more going on, but really jQuery is not that complicated when you get right down to it. It just takes some practice to wrap your head around keeping all of these different elements straight. And, oh, someone else is in the room. Who else is here? Oh, no, wait, oh, no, that's just me and you. Oh, man. All right. I love you, Zach. All right. So in this case, it's a pretty simple demonstration. We only have one button, which does a very simple action. But at the same time, we can get considerably more complicated with this. So let me go ahead and draw up a UL here with a couple different list items. And we'll see how we can use the same kind of approach to manipulate lists in a fun way. Okay, I'm going to keep them as a regular old list, as though it's maybe a to-do list or a list of users or a list of data points from a database or something along those lines. And let's say that when I hover over a list item, I want the list item to turn white with a red background. Now, if you're thinking that this is something I could easily do in CSS, that's absolutely true, but we're going to build on this. We're going to build it out to a point where we could no longer accomplish this effect in pure CSS. So there is my prompt. Those are my two clauses. And first, we're going to select our target from this first clause, which is a list item. When I hover over a list item, the target is going to be list item. And if we're just using regular CSS syntax, CSS selector syntax, to target that list item, we're simply going to do so with $, parentheses, and then in quotations, li. Simple element or type selector. And then the event is going to be .hover. When we hover over the list item, do stuff. Now let me pause for just a moment here, and if there were more of you, I'd ask you guys, how do you think it's going to know which list item element I'm referring to? If this is a CSS selector, then this should be selecting all list item elements, right? So let me put this another way. That's true, yeah, I could definitely give it an ID, but let me put it another way. If I write out a variable called myvar and set it equal to $, parentheses, quotes, li, what data type do you think this variable now contains? So we know that HTML elements in JavaScript are all objects. Their data type is entirely object-based. So what do we think that myvars contain? Do we think it contains one list item object? Do we think it contains 4 list item objects? Okay, it does contain all the list items, but it contains them in the form of an array. an array of 1, 2, 3, 4 objects. So let me try and just plug that into my console. What we can see returning to me, there's a little bit of funkiness because we've got this jQuery function init object type here. That's constructor function stuff. It's more the subject of week 10. But disregard that. What we see here is square bracket, li, 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 and ending square bracket. You see some more weirdness. But the core of what we're seeing here is an array. At the 0 index is the first list item. At the first index is the second list item. Second index, the third list item, etc. And it has a length of 4. So this is an array, or an array-like collection, of 4 list item objects. So what I'm getting at here is this jQuery syntax selects all list items and doesn't differentiate between the two. In order to do this without jQuery, with vanilla JavaScript, we would need to do something like document.get elements by tag name li. Right? That's the vanilla JavaScript equivalent to this single line of jQuery down here. Damn. There we go. So JavaScript on top, jQuery below. So we're going to keep building on this such that both of these lines of code are going to get longer and longer, and we're going to see how jQuery can truly help simplify our code in the end. So when I hover over a list item, I want it to turn white with a red background. It's actually very easy to manipulate the styles of an element in jQuery. So what I'm going to do first is I need to ask myself, what's going to happen is it's going to turn white with a red background, but what do I want to turn white with a red background? I want the list item to turn white with a red background. So let's start by simply using the exact same selector. And to change the styles, I'm going to add .css. Hey, planets. If you'd like, jump on into the appear.in link I dropped into the general chat, and I can actually hear your voice and questions, and you will not be dealing with the lag between the recording and what's actually going on my screen. So feel free to jump on in. You're right, it does contain all the LIs, but I'm going to get deeper into it in a minute. So I select my LIs, I add .css, the .css method, and inside this method, I'm going to feed an argument of an object. And this object is going to contain all the individual CSS properties that I want to change and their values, like this. Color, red, well, actually, color should be white, and background color, red there, and white here. Hi, Rena, how you doing? Okay, so the .css method, we simply plugged a regular old object literal as an argument in .css, and what's going to happen is all of our list items are going to be injected with a style tag which contains the color property set to white, the background color property set to red. I'm going to save, reload, and then I'm going to hover over one of these list items. Okay, and they all change. They instantly change. Let's take a look in our Elements tab, and that's how they're changing. That .css method has taken that object and simply injected it into the style property here. This is one more reason among many that we tell you guys never to write inline styles. This is the job of JavaScript. This is the job of JavaScript. Okay, so .css is a really easy way to manipulate styles. Now how would I actually do this without jQuery? The vanilla JavaScript equivalent to this would require me to first select all of my variables, just like this, I now have an array of all of my list items stored in my var. And then I would need to run a for loop. Where I is less than my var.length, the loop will still run. And inside this loop, what we're going to be doing is selecting the item at the I index of the myvar array, and we're going to be adding an event listener, which listens for a mouse over event, and fires a function which changes individual style elements. It wouldn't be this. It would be this dot target, wouldn't it? Anyway, point being, vanilla JavaScript versus jQuery. I'm going to get rid of my pseudocode here so we can really see the difference. In terms of character count alone, this is 101 characters, and this is 229 characters. So it's less than 50% of the code. Less than 50% of the code that we would write with vanilla JavaScript. However, we're obviously not exactly where we want to be, because this isn't the effect that we wanted to achieve, right? We just want one list item to change color when we hover on it. So this calls for the this selector. If I change the selector inside our hover function from li to this, we're not going to apply this new CSS styling to every list item, but rather to only the individual list item which we're hovering on. Just think about that, because achieving that with vanilla JavaScript is not easy. It requires a good deal more code. And so now they change one at a time. When I hover on any list item, I want this list item to change styles. Now let's make it change back when we hover off. Well, this is going to require something called a callback function, which we'll talk about more probably later today. But the way a callback function works is essentially this .hover method takes a function as an argument, right? I'm going to separate out my code a little bit, see if we can make it a little cleaner or easier to read and see what's going on. I think that'll do it. You got object literal .css method inside a function inside our hover method on our list items. Bring that down too. Okay, so our hover method has taken one function as an argument. But if you jumped into the Mozilla Developer Network web docs or anything like that, you'd see that .hover is actually capable of taking more than one argument. So we can give it one function, which will fire when we hover on an element, and we can give it another function, which will fire when we hover off. So for this one, all I'm going to do, select this again, this list item, and set its CSS to, well, how about I just keep it simple, and we're going to use the exact same object. But we're going to reset the style properties to empty strings. So reload my page, hover on, hover off, hover on, hover off. And this will now work for any of them. So this is what's called a callback function. We've got a function which fires immediately when this event is heard, and a callback function which fires when the event ends. Callback functions, as I said, we're going to spend some more time on them, probably, but they're part of what you can think of as the life cycle of an event. An event has a whole life cycle, a point where it's heard, a point where it ends, a point where it's being fired, a point where it's actively propagating. There are a lot of individual life cycle hooks for various events or states that you can hook into in this way. For hover and click and scroll, simple events like that, it's really simple. The most complicated one is going to be the callback function, which will fire when the event ends. But it's a really good thing to know for hover effects triggered by jQuery. Now, all that's great, all that's grand, but we're still at a point. Actually, before I continue, let me quickly throw down the vanilla JavaScript equivalent of this. It'd be the exact same thing, only rather than mouse over, it would be mouse leave, empty strings. So we would be adding 2 different event listeners to each list item in the myvar array, one for mouse over and one for mouse leave. And all of this would be done in a for loop. So now we're looking at 360 characters for the vanilla JavaScript compared to 207 for the jQuery. So it's still quite a huge reduction of code, considerably more than a third. But we're still at a point where we could do this with straight up CSS, so why should we care? Well, we can do more than just change the CSS of the list item that we're hovering on in this way. I'm going to start condensing a little bit. In addition to changing the style of the list item that we are hovering on, we can also change, here we go. We can also change the style of the list items which we're not hovering on. I think I got a little off the rails there. List item dot not this. Okay. And let's change their CSS to color light gray. And how about opacity? 0.5. See if I need to fix that selector there. Nope. Okay. Now we just need to carry over the exact same thing in our callback function. Load. So now when you hover over one, all of the rest fade out. And once you hover off, they all jump back into their original black state. Yeah, right, it's fantastic. But you know, if I throw in a quick, don't need that, throw in a quick transition property in my CSS, well, now it does have a little more, it's got a little bit of a cleaner feel. It's got a little bit of easing, it animates in and out. And this obviously isn't the most beautiful example, but it does the trick. More than that, though, some ways in which I've seen this kind of stuff used to great effect is for a greater level of feedback for users. So for example, let's say we're dealing with a gray background color on our body by default. Inside this same hover function on our list items, we can also select our body and change its background color to white when we hover over a list item. For the effect of really making that red one pop out that much more. Let me just go ahead and give this to everything. So realistically, your entire page, everything on your page, can in some way respond to which link in your navigation bar you're hovering over, or which sidebar item you're clicking on. And that's really what makes jQuery so powerful. You can do an awful lot with very, very little. Yeah, it's still used in, I want to say, the majority of the internet. jQuery is extremely, extremely popular. You should absolutely know how to use it and read it. However, I don't think that's going to be the case forever. I do think it has peaked and it's on its way down, but it's going to be a long, long, long trip down. And even if you don't believe that it's worth it to learn jQuery, it's extremely relevant nowadays, and it is the basis for a lot of more complex libraries that are still in use today. I mean, heck, we can't use Bootstrap without jQuery. All right, so that's the basis of jQuery. It allows you to do a whole lot less with a whole lot little. But let's go ahead and try and make something a little cooler here. I'm going to turn this unordered list into a nav bar real fast. And we're kind of going to do the same thing with it that we did in the first webinar with pure CSS, only this time we're going to use jQuery and JavaScript. I sure do. All right, let's see. I don't have any kind of reset on, so that ought to do it. There it is. And finally, all right, we got our links. I don't like that anymore. Anyway, let's have this nav bar by default position relative be off the screen. So it's going to be entirely off the screen. We're not going to see it at all. But we want it to drop down when we start scrolling down our page. So I'm just going to throw in some big old sections for content. Okay, 3 different sections on our page. And what we want is, as soon as we start scrolling, we want our nav bar to pop into view. So what needs to change for that to happen? Let's say I'm halfway down my page. What needs to change about the nav bar in order for it to pop into view here? And this is the basics of animation here, really. You need to understand how you're going to get from point A to point B, from 0 to 100, such as it is. Currently, our nav bar has a position of absolute, top minus 100 pixels. Well, if I change top from 100 pixels to 0, that doesn't quite do it. Although my nav bar is now on screen. Before I forget, so we need more than just top 0, because it will pop in, but it's all the way on top, and I want to see it no matter where I am on my page. So I'm going to change absolute to fixed as well. Those are the 2 CSS properties that we want to change when we scroll down on our page. So using jQuery, let's do body dot on scroll callback function. And what's going to happen is we're going to select our nav element, change its CSS to position fixed and top 0. So as soon as I scroll down, why is it not hearing that scroll? There we go. The body's not scrolling, the window is. Okay, so one more time, our page starts, it opens like this. We've got our big dramatic hero image. As soon as a user interacts with it, which is as soon as they start to scroll down to see more, nav bar pops down. Let me go ahead and give that a longer transition. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can listen for scrolling and actually determine where on your page you actually are. So let me do that right here. It's easier inside the vanilla event listener, but let's see if we can access our event object from here. There we go. So inside any kind of event listener or event handler, whether it's on click, on scroll, mouse enter, mouse leave, hover, there is generated an automatic event object in JavaScript. And you'll see here in my console, a new one is created every single time I touch my mouse wheel. And let's open one of these up. So target is the document. So that's what we're scrolling in. Current target is the window. And what else do we have here? We've even got a timestamp for when we were scrolling, type of event, the path, default prevented false. You normally use that for things like when you hit enter and you want something to submit through an input. You need to prevent the default from propagating. The path is going to tell you how far you scrolled, what kind of a scroll it was, how quickly you scrolled. But it's really just a matter of navigating this big old event object that generates when you listen for an event. No. I mean, not that I know of anyway. I'm not sure what drives the CAPTCHA tech, but that's a good question. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's pretty fascinating. That's really cool. So let me change this to a click event, and we'll get more manageable event objects here to work through. All right, so if I click here, what we're really looking for that's most valuable to us is the screen X and screen Y, or client X and client Y. These are literally the position of my mouse when I clicked. If I click over here, it's dramatically different. Down here, up here, over here. So we can use this to determine, well, anything, really. You can use this to cause an animation to respond in a certain way. For those of you who are familiar with this dude, all he really is a bunch of divs with different background colors which move based on which sector of the page my mouse is in. So if my mouse wanders here within this big square calculated by an event listener, then all of the divs in his face get this class of look down. And that class defines an entirely different position from here to here. Everything has an eased transition effect on it, so it looks as though he's animating, but he's really just a bunch of divs that are moving, that are adjusting from one position to another. So there's a lot of creative things you can do with stuff like that. Actually, I have a good idea. Let's go ahead and first test this out a little bit more. Let's go ahead and make some responsive click bubbles. So first thing is we're going to want to create an element that follows our mouse. We're going to want to create an element that follows our mouse, and when we click, that element is going to expand into a bubble. It's going to look like ripples or something like that. We're going to play with it and see what we can do. So let's go ahead and get rid of all of this. I'll leave the sections, because why not? Move this. And I'll get rid of all the superfluous CSS for now. I'm going to get rid of the transition as well, because we're going to animate this frame by frame. Okay. So, in our JavaScript, we're going to want two variables here at any given time. We're going to want the position X of our mouse and the position Y of our mouse, and we're going to need to know these at all times. So I'm just going to start by setting them equal to 0, or you could even set them to nothing. We don't actually do this very often at Codify. You don't see me do this, but I tend to set things to 0 if I know they're going to be updated almost immediately. But what a lot of other developers will do is simply declare their variables and not give them a value. That's fine if you want to do that. I don't do that because this can cause you to run into the issue of these variables will currently return undefined. And that can be misleading. It can suggest to you that either you did something wrong or there's something wrong in your code, when in reality, that's not the case at all. It's just they haven't been given a proper value yet. Okay. So let's figure this out. Let's just use one single section. And we're going to make follow mouse position absolute so it doesn't interfere with any of our layout. Boy, I haven't done this in a while. This will be fun. And using jQuery, let's go ahead and select our section. And we're going to listen for a mouse move event. And let's just test it by console logging event from inside this function. Okay, there we go. It's definitely working. Now we're going to need to use that event. Something that you'll see a lot of other developers do, I want you to know this because you are going to see it, is when dealing with an event object, you're often going to see this exact same setup, but instead written this way. It's the exact same thing. I want you to understand that. I don't want you to get thrown by the fact that suddenly the function has an argument where it didn't before. But you'll see it's the exact same thing. The only difference is now it's reading as a jQuery event, but same exact thing. Alternatively, without that E, if we console log this, it's going to be the section because we're not in vanilla JavaScript. Disregard what I just said. But when you see a function inside an event listener with an argument like E, it is simply giving a custom moniker to the event object. We could just as easily remove that argument altogether and refer directly to the event object. E, however, is very common practice. Okay. Now then, what can we get that's useful from this event, E? There's client X and client Y, that might work. Offset X and offset Y, that'll probably work. But the very best that we could hope for is page X and page Y. Okay, that's what we're really going to use here, because these are very reliable pixel coordinates for where our mouse was when it completed this mouse move event. And look, here's the original jQuery event right there. I love objects. Okay, so inside, how about we change this around to now console log e.pageX and e.pagey. Okay, so these are the coordinates of our mouse, X and Y. So that's perfect. We're going to use that. Yeah, okay, we're going to use that. Now, when we click inside this section, so we're adding two different event listeners to this section, one mouse move and one click, we're going to run a function which is going to create a circle element. Actually, we don't need to. We have follow mouse. But no, let's do that. Let's create it from scratch when we click. It'll be more responsive that way. So nothing but section in our HTML. When we click anywhere in section, we are going to append to section the following. And I'm just going to write straight HTML markup in here, which is the really cool part of the append jQuery method as opposed to append child, in regular JavaScript. Let's make a div, give it a class of circle, and yeah, we're going to need to do this inline because we're adjusting the style of it as we move our mouse. It's going to have a left property set to position Y, no, position X, which we will be updating inside our mouse move function to be e.pageX. And then we need to concatenate. We need to remember our pixels at the end of these properties. Then it will have a top property set to position Y plus pixels. And then we can close our div. And that's it. Okay, so we are going to be creating and appending this to section when we click in it. Make sense? Only thing I'm going to add here is I'm going to select the class of circle and give it position absolute so that it will be wherever my mouse is. Yeah. Okay. Let's test this out. Let's give this a height of 50 pixels, width 50 pixels, background color white. And test this out. We want to see if this circle is created in the right place when we click in section. Ooh, before I forget, position Y equals e.page Y. Mouse event fires. All right, and there's our dot circle. So what else am I going to add here? Border radius 50%. I don't like how far away from my arrow it actually is. So I'm going to move it up and to the left a little bit. Let's do minus 40 and minus 40. See how that works. That's a little too far. 20. All right, I'll buy that for $1. That'll work. That'll do. Stop me, anybody out there, if you have any questions or you want me to stop and backtrack. We don't have a whole lot of code on the page, but it can definitely feel like unfamiliar code if you haven't dealt with event listeners or haven't had a lot of exposure to jQuery at this point in time. Anyway, all right, so we create the circle element, and then let's have this element animate, kind of like a ripple effect. So rather than do that in jQuery, although we could, I'm going to do this in pure CSS. And the way I'm going to do that is first set the opacity to 0. And I'm going to use transform to set scale to 0. Yeah, and let's also just give it a, we're not going to use any keyframe animations or anything. We're going to try it this way first. Let's set a 2-second transition to this. So now all I'm going to do is counteract opacity and scale inline here with opacity 1 and transform scale 1. Let's see if that'll do it. No, it does not. All right, so I will need to animate that. Okay, not a big deal. So get rid of that transition, and I'm going to replace it with animate. We'll call it ripple. 2 seconds. Animation. Animation ripple 2 seconds. And now we need to define that animation. We'll keep it simple. Add keyframes. Ripple. 100% will be opacity 1. And transform scale 1. All right, we're getting there. Let's change that to 1 second. And I know how we can make this really look like a ripple. 50%. So halfway through the animation, opacity is going to be 1. 100% through, opacity is going to go back to 0. All right, we're kind of getting there. Get the idea. Let's change this 30 maybe. All right, something like that. Let's change the scale to something big like 3. All right, I mean, there may be a bit of a lag on screen, but it's looking okay now. It's looking okay because it's reaching its peak of opacity, which means when it's the brightest, when it's whitest, when it's completely non-transparent, 30% of the way through the animation. But the whole time, from 0 to 100, it's scaling from 0 to 3, or from 0% of its original size, which is here, to 300% of its original size. So it's growing bigger and bigger. It peaks in opacity 30% of the way through, and then it becomes transparent again. So the point is to give a ripple effect where it balloons outward and fades away. So we're doing okay so far. We're getting there. Only problem is we're creating a hell of a lot of divs with the class of circle. Every time I click, I create a new one. We don't want that. We don't want that. We want to actually remove this div after we append it and after the animation has finished. So this brings me to using the set timeout function, which is our first function for timing, setting some serious significant timing in our JavaScript. And just to review real quickly, set timeout takes 2 arguments. It takes a function, and it takes a number, something like 1000. The function is what the set timeout function will run. The number is how many milliseconds the set timeout function will wait to run this function. So in other words, if this function simply runs an alert that says hello, and I put 5,000 milliseconds in here, then when I reload my page, 5 seconds later, we're going to get an alert that says hello. There it is. 5,000 milliseconds is 5 seconds. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So that's set timeout. It's fairly straightforward. Pretty easy to understand. But it's what's called a higher order function. We've already seen a couple of these with things like add event listener instead of on click. But this, I'd say, is the quintessential higher order function that a lot of people get introduced to. It takes one argument, a function, which it runs after this amount of time. So we're going to use this inside our click event on our section in order to remove this element after, let's say, a second and a half, since the animation is 1 second long. Okay, so I'm going to set myself up here by adding down here set timeout. And let's do 1 1/4 second. 1 1/4 second. And in order to remove this element from section, it's actually not that hard. What we're going to do is inside this set timeout function, select the section, use the jQuery.remove function, and what we're going to remove is section space dot circle. So we're going to remove the element with the class of circle inside of the section. Remember, these are just CSS selectors, so don't let them throw you. All right, so let's see if this works now. Reload my page. Let me grab my section, make sure we can see it in our elements. Get rid of that alert. And I'm going to click. Oh, we got an error. Expression.replace is not a function. All right, let's do this another way then. I thought that would work. If it doesn't, it's not a big deal. I'm going to create another placeholder variable called circle up here. And inside our click, we're simply going to set circle equal to the whole append expression. And we're just going to remove that variable circle. I'm guessing it has to do with, I mean, I'll investigate it further, but I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that this is read as a node, whereas the other was not. Nope, still not working. All right, let's see. Oh, that's strange. Okay, so circle is actually referring to section. Let's see. All right, let's try it this way then. Unrecognized expression. That's crazy. All right, let's take a look then. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, okay. Remove doesn't take an argument. I'm exercising it on the actual DOM element, which I want to be removed. My bad. And we're good. One more time. Let's watch section here. I click, and it empties. Click, empties. Click, empties. Let's change this down to 1000 so it's an even second. See if it interferes with our animation at all. Nope. Looks pretty good. We've now got click bubbles wherever we want them. However, if we click too fast, things get confused. So that's a danger here that we need to watch. Something we could code against with a state manager, though. But we won't get into that. All right, so that's some click bubbles. We're having some fun there. Let's use this same set timeout function and some jQuery, though, to create a more ambitious menu. One way we can use set timeout, and we're going to go, actually no jQuery, we're going to go back to vanilla JavaScript now, but using set timeout, we can use it in conjunction with a for loop for some really interesting stagger effects. So for example, let's bring back that nav bar. Come on now, there we go. All right, it's still off screen, which is fine. So what we're going to do is using vanilla JavaScript document.body.add event listener scroll function. So when we hear a scroll event on our body, document.get elements by tag name nav 0 index. Let's set this in a variable. Navbar dot style dot top equals 0. Navbar dot style dot position equals fixed. Let's see if that works first. Nope, that's not happening. Which means it's not hearing my scroll event. Yeah. Didn't I just do this exact same thing? There we go, the window. The window is scrolling, not the body. Gotta keep telling myself that. All right, so that's working now. But we're going to actually have the individual links kind of stagger drop from the top. Okay. So in addition to this, let's have our LIs be position relative bottom 200 pixels. Okay, so our links are now off screen. Let's go ahead and select them. For my LIs equals document.get elements by tag name li. So we're going to have an array there. And inside our scroll function, for I equals 0, I is less than my li's dot length, I plus plus. And what we're going to do for each item in my LIs is we're going to give them a set timeout. So let's store it in a temporary active li variable and execute a set timeout function inside our for loop, which is going to cause the active li.style.bottom equals 0 to fire after, let's say, 1/4 of a second times I. Let's see if that works. Nope. Because they're... All right, let's do this. Yeah. So navbar in this case is, pardon me, navbar is specifically the element with the tag name of nav, the very first one in the array that returns to me. So document.getElements by tag name nav is going to return every element with the tag name of nav on my page. But I don't want that list. I don't want that array. I want that one object inside of it. I know there's only one, so I select the one at the 0 index. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yes. Right. Ah. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. That's a great question, actually. The way that we could do that is really easy, actually. Navbar.children. So if I run this same line of code and add .children to the end of it, damn it. Hold on. Oh, navbar.children, yeah. Because we don't have children of an array. There we go. Okay, so navbar.children, the nav element has only one child, which is the UL, so we actually want navbar.children.children, if that makes sense. Cool, so let's see, navbar.children, which is the UL.children. Ah, right, okay, .children returns an array, which only has one child, one UL, so I'm going to select the item at the 0 index. .children gives us the array of list items, which are specifically grandchildren of the navbar. So that's a way you can be more specific with JavaScript. However, this is a prime example of how jQuery would be of better help to you. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So now let's go ahead and fix this set timeout function. There's some funkiness going on because of scoping issues, but let's see if we can't fix it. Okay, so active li dot style at the bottom equals 0. We're trying to execute this set timeout for each one of them. Let's see. Yeah, so it's all targeting the 4th li because I'm using var instead of let, in the hopes of keeping things simple. Yeah, that'll work. Well, before I explain let and what's going on there, notice that now the links kind of stagger on in. Let me spread them out. That's too slow. Now they drop one at a time. So we can create some fun little effects like this where you have elements of a list slide in a staggered form from the right, or these kind of list items drop in a staggered way up top. We can use set timeout inside a for loop in exactly this fashion in order to trigger repeated delays of a certain animation. If this is the kind of stuff that you're into, there are plenty of additional tools for animation that can be used. But that's the gist behind set timeout and some of the ways in which you can get creative with it. Where it's really helpful is in things like handling timestamps and creating a clock-based application, which we can walk through. Real quick though, I used let here instead of var. Let is an ES6 variation of the variable declaration var. And all it is more temporary than var. Now active li will not exist at all outside the scope of this for loop. And every time the for loop runs, it's actually going to reset. But I will get into that more probably in a later session that's focused almost entirely on ES6. So let's go ahead and explore the JavaScript date method and how we can use set timeout there for things like creating a reliable timestamp or clock. So I'm going to create an H1 with an ID of clock on my page. And first thing that we need to do is I'm going to create a variable called now, and in that I'm going to store a new date object. If you've already been through week 10, you should be familiar with this kind of syntax and recognize that between the new keyword and the fact that this function starts with a capitalized letter, that this is a constructor function. It is a constructor function. And what this does is create a date object that has all of the time information, time-related information we could possibly want. It even has my time zone. And we can parse out this information for more specific pieces, such as now dot, let me do this in console, now dot get hours. It's 12 hours into the day. Or now dot get minutes. All of these methods are very readily available at W3 Schools if you're interested. But we're going to go ahead and put together a clock here. And the point of putting together this clock is not to give you the solution to a project, but rather to show you a more functional way of approaching it. So for this clock, we're going to want the time presented in HHMMSS format. Hours, minutes, seconds. Considerations here are we always want 2 digits in each spot. That is potentially a problem. Because if it were 4 seconds into the minute, the number that would return to us would be 4, not 04, for example. Or if it were 1 o'clock in the morning, hours would be 1, not 01. And that's the kind of thing which we want to code against here. Okay? In addition, we don't want military time. Unfortunately, hours will always be listed in military time using now.getHours method. So we need to code against that. So now that we have our now variable, let's go ahead and pull out what we need. var hh equals now.getHours. var equals now.getMinutes. var ss equals now.getSeconds. And let's just try console logging HH plus colon plus MM plus SS. And we get 12:25 in the afternoon and 16 seconds. So far, so good. However, this is a really good moment for you to try to think through these problems on your own, because if you were just coding a clock and you happen to be doing it at 12:25 in the afternoon and you never saw that seconds can be a single digit, or that 1 o'clock is going to read at 13, or 4 minutes is going to read at a single digit 4, you might never be aware of either of these problems. So it's really just an exercise in walking yourself through different user experiences of any application or page that you're building. You have to put yourself in the shoes of a user using our clock at 2 in the morning. Well, what would that look like? And you need to figure that out. If there's anything wrong with it, you need to fix it. What would it look like if a user's using our clock at 7 in the evening? At 12 o'clock in the middle of the day? You need to be able to flesh out all of those scenarios and find the bugs or possibly even the dead ends in your apps as you build them. So far so good. We're off to the right, and we're off to a good start. I'm going to put this inside of a function called getTime. And we're just going to invoke getTime as soon as our page loads now. So nothing should change except the time. Ooh, wait. Come on. There we go. See, now seconds is a single digit. We definitely do not want that. So far so good. We've got our time going. But how can we turn this into a working clock? How could we use set timeout here to cause this function to run every single second? Well, what we can do is inside of this getTime function actually use a set timeout function which invokes getTime after 1 second. So what's going to happen here is we load our page, getTime is invoked, it console logs the current time, waits 1 second, and calls itself again. Console logs the current time, waits 1 second, calls itself again. Console logs the time, waits 1 second, calls itself again. So I'm going to save that, reload, and see it's working. It is in fact calling itself every second like a clock. Problem is the time's not changing. Can anyone think of why? Yeah, exactly. This date object is static. As soon as it's created, this date object, it doesn't change. So as far as this object is concerned, it's always 12:28 and 23 seconds. Perfect. So what we really need to do is move this inside our getTime function. And now we have the makings of a working clock. Only issues we want to deal with now is we want to ensure that hours and minutes and well, all of these really are always double digits. Let's go ahead and deal with that one first. So let's say it is 2 in the morning. How do we turn 2 into 02? Good. What are we concatenating with the 2? Yeah, but it's going to be in a string. It's going to be in string form. So we're going to do string 0 plus number 2. and it's going to stringify the whole expression to return 0, 2. So the best way to do that is going to be with an if statement, right? If minutes is less than 10, add a 0, blah, blah, blah. If seconds is less than 10, add a 0. If hours is less than 10, add a 0. But do we really want to run that same if statement 3 different times? We don't have to. We don't have to, and we shouldn't want to. So this is where thinking functionally comes in. We pretty much need to do the same thing to these 3 different variables, h, h, m, m, and ss. So why write the same if statement 3 times with just a different condition, when instead we can do something like write our own utility function, like add 0. And add 0 is going to take some kind of argument. Could be hours, minutes, or seconds. So I'm going to call it time. And what add 0 is going to do is it's going to check if time is less than 10, then we're going to return 0 plus time. Otherwise, we're simply going to return time. And now what we can easily do is run add 0 on now.getHours, now.getMinutes, and now.getSeconds. And we will never run into the issue of having to deal with a single digit. See? 0, 0 seconds, 0, 1, 0, 2. Now it's looking more like a clock. The next issue is we need to make sure that hours are not in military time. So let's write another little utility function, something like format hours. And this is going to take an argument, which I'm going to call hours. What this is going to do is check if hours is greater than 12, return hours minus 12. Otherwise, return hours. So if it's 2 in the afternoon, hours is going to be 14. So 14 is greater than 12, and we're going to return 14 minus 12, 2. Otherwise, if it's, say, 7 in the morning, this is going to be false, and we're simply going to return 7. So I'm going to add that format hours of now.getHours just like that. So we've got 3 nested, well, one method, 2 functions and 1 method, all nested within one another. Now.getHours, which returns the hours pulled from our date object. Format hours on whatever that number is, which will turn military time into US time, and then add 0 on the product of that, which will make sure that it always returns as a double-digit number. And the advantage of writing these utility functions like this is if there's an error somewhere in our code, it's in a very confined little bubble of space. It's very easy to find that bug. It's very easy to find that error and track it down and fix it. So we've broken up all these little tiny tasks into miniature functions, just like this. And it makes for a very smoothly running application. It makes for very easy to read and easy to process code. And it makes it very clean. Makes it very clean. Yeah, so it's just little steps like that that you want to try to ask yourself as you get more experience and more confident writing JavaScript. How can I refactor this to make it less code or cleaner code or more efficient code? And this is just one of those ways to do that. Only big change I'd make now is I would actually change all of these vars to let, so that we're not creating a big old garbage dump of variables that our JavaScript is dealing with, but that's neither here nor there and not a big issue for you guys right now. But that's our clock. Last thing that we could do is add an AM and PM to the end of it. You know, let's see, plus space plus, let's create a new AM PM. And we're going to set it by default to AM. And how are we going to do this? Let's write another utility function, get meridian, which is going to take HH as an argument. No, it's going to take now.getHours as an argument. And function get meridian. It's simply going to check if hours is greater than 12, return PM. Else, return AM. Greater than or equal to. Ooh. Hang on though, because midnight needs to be AM, noon needs to be PM. But midnight is going to read as 00, so that should work. All right, there we go. No, that's true, but the argument for get meridian is now.getHours. It's not the formatted hours. So now.getHours is going to be the original unformatted hours, in which case midnight would actually return as 0. Does that make sense? So that's going to make this read AM, and that 0 is going to get formatted as 00. Ooh, that's a good one. We found an error. We found a bug. Midnight is going to read as 00. We don't want that. It should read as 12. Up here, though, not in the meridian's now working, but our hours now has a little bit of a bug. So how can we fix that? In format hours, let's see. So now.getHours will be 0. Format hours will turn it into 00. And if 00 is greater than 12, return hours minus 12. It's not going to happen. It's going to return 00. So we're just going to need an if statement nested in that else. If hours equals 0, return 12. Else, return hours. Okay. Let's see if that works. Let's actually run new date on here we go. Let's do 2018 February 7th, 0 hours, 12 minutes, 50 seconds. Yeah, okay, now it's working. But this shows you another cool thing that we can do with the date method. We can actually plug in any date and time that we'd like. And what this gives us the option to do is create countdown timers. You guys ever seen well, Zach, have you ever seen a countdown timer on the web? Yeah, okay, so there are countdown timers all over the place, and the way that we might build one of those is we'd set, a present variable equal to new date, and a future variable equal to the date in 2019 January 1st, midnight, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. Get the idea. We set a future date. Let's grab those in our console. Turn off my clock first. So present is today. Future is a Tuesday in 2019. I can actually do future minus present, and this returns the milliseconds in between now and then. So I could then say divide that by 1,000 and get the number of seconds, and divide that by 60, get the number of minutes, divide that by 60, get the number of hours, divided by 24, get the number of days. You get the idea. You can parse this number of milliseconds into a reliable countdown, like, this many days until opening season, this many hours until the new release, or 3 days left until Father's Day. Jump in on the sale before it ends. And these kinds of timers, these kinds of timestamps are used all over the web. All over the web. So the week 12 project for you guys, not that we should really be talking about the projects too much, is meant to be a custom user dashboard. And it's a pretty straightforward one, but it can be really intimidating at first if you've never had to deal with these before. It involves a functioning clock, including the formatted date. So you're going to need to do essentially what we did with the time, with the date as well. Actually, let's talk about that for a second. If I do now, present, we're dealing with present now. Present dot get month. Yeah. Zach? No, it could be me. All right, well, I mean, we're nearing the end here anyway. I'm sorry we didn't get to the Magic Leap thing, but you and I can talk about that. You and I can talk about that on our own some other time. So present.getMonth actually returns a number of 7. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's obviously not July, it's August, right? The reason for that is because the months of the year are stored in an array, and the first item in any array is at the 0 index. So this is actually the index of the current month that we're in. So little things like that are the things that you need to be aware of in formatting a full-on date like this. Another thing is we have a randomly generated user ID. So that's 4 different random numbers within a certain threshold that you'll be generating. And we have these 3 buttons right here, which actually hot swap the content in this section over here on the right, without reloading the page or changing the URL or anything. So 1, 2, 3, actually 4 very, very common and critical to understand elements of fundamental user interface design. Hot swapping content, random number generation, functioning timestamp, and number 4 is actually this progress bar. This progress bar is not generated at random. It's not using a plugin. It's entirely built from scratch, and its degree of completion is determined by a data point concerning this user. This whole page is quote-unquote pulling information from a back end. It's not really, because we're not learning how to communicate with servers. But this page has been set up with a range of data, which is intended to come from a server or a backend, which is determining the content of this section, the content of these buttons, the content of the user ID, content of the username, content of the user image, and the degree of completion of this progress bar. Not only the number displayed in the center, but how much of it is blue. So this is going to be, for those of you who haven't dealt with it yet, this is the first real potentially intensive instance of you guys having to process a lot of information coming from a quote-unquote third party. And that, in reality, is what front-end is all about. Because, if I jump to Grubhub, for example, and I type in Indian food, even though it wants my address, let's do 535 Mission. If I type 535 Mission Street, this page is generated entirely as a result of data coming from a back-end server. Now, the front end is what determines how it looks, how we interact with it, but you guys are now in a position to understand how these wires are being connected. Somewhere on a database, there is a collection of data that has returned an array of objects, or an object containing an array of objects representing each one of these restaurants. Let me see if I can filter it. All right, so we still have a lot. 2 pages worth of Indian restaurants near 535 Mission Street. But this page, which specifically shows Indian restaurants near 535 Mission Street, was not pre-built. Somebody didn't have to sit around and build the website, which I have been directed to, on the off chance that someone someday would look for Indian restaurants near 535 Mission Street. That, it just doesn't work that way. And I hope you can appreciate why. That's an extraordinarily inefficient way of handling things. Instead, a template was made, a front-end template that tells the browser where the sidebar is going to go, what all of these buttons do, how they interact with other information on the page, where the nav bar is going to be. But things like these dynamically generated restaurants are all being pulled from a database. So when I hit enter after typing in Indian, an API call, if you will, or a call to a server was made requesting information regarding this query, Indian, and this query, 535 Mission Street. And what was returned to my browser was a collection of data containing things like Indian oven, Alhambra Indian pizza and curry, Bamboo Asia, Mafil, everything else on this page currently. And the front end, that's our job now, the front end took that data, parsed all of it out into individual sections with a little image, title, description, coupons available, some matches, the stars, the dollar signs, the delivery minimum, distance, time. All of this was pulled from pure object-based data and printed on the page. That's what front-end is about. Much less about building static websites and more about taking data and predictably generating an attractive, aesthetically pleasing, and branding consistent website based on that data. Does that make sense? I know it can be pretty esoteric. It can be difficult to grasp. Zach, I know you've got a pretty good handle on all this stuff, but no one else is out there to tell me whether or not this makes sense. But this is what it really gets down to. I mean, and this is the thing it's easy to lose sight of. It's easy to think that as front-end developers, we just sit around building websites or managing WordPress, things like that. That is not in any way, shape, or form the case. And once you shake that mentality, if you can wrap your head around how this stuff fits together, you'll be unstoppable. And that's the point, to make you guys unstoppable. $100%. Yeah. 100%. Awesome insight. Well, how about you, Zach? Do you have any last questions for me or anything else you want to go over? We didn't quite get as far as I'd like. I think I spent too much time where I shouldn't have, but I hope this was at least a little helpful. And obviously, we'll be doing this again in like 3 or 4 weeks, so we'll have plenty of opportunities to get better at it. Cool. Excellent. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I do think I'll do another one specifically on APIs, which does involve communicating with backends a bit. So that should open up some more doors. But yeah, thanks very much for your participation, Zach. As always, you're killing it. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's nice to hear when I feel like I'm going off the rails. But thanks very much, and thanks to all of you who are watching now or in the future. And I'll talk to you again soon.